Under the haze of a summer evening, a group of racist men decided they owned the streets. They thought their spray cans and baseball bats would send a message loud enough to chase a black man out of town. However, they never expected their target to fight back. What they couldn't see was the disciplined strength beneath the man's calm demeanor, honed through years of grueling missions and impossible odds. He wasn't just a man returning to a shattered home. He was the military's most deadly Marine, a warrior who had faced threats far more dangerous than a gang of racists. When their taunts turned into threats and their threats into action, the man didn't raise his voice. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and their laughter filled the air, the ground beneath them began to shift. This wasn't going to end the way they expected, and they would soon learn why fear, once provoked, can cut both ways. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. Jamal Hayes adjusted the rear-view mirror, glancing briefly at the uniform folded neatly on the seat behind him. After months overseas, the thought of stepping into his own home filled him with a rare sense of relief. The military trained him to thrive in chaos. But now, all he wanted was peace. The familiar stretch of his suburban neighborhood came into view, quiet and unchanged. Or so he thought. As his truck rounded the corner, his eyes locked on his house, and the relief drained from his face. He slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding. Slurs and graffiti defaced the pristine white siding, the porch scorched with charred remains of what used to be his welcome mat. The lawn was littered with broken beer bottles, fast food wrappers, and other trash. Racial symbols and crude drawings sprawled across the walls in ugly, jagged strokes. Jamal threw the door open and stepped out, his chest heaving as the shock turned to anger. His boots crunched on the gravel as he moved closer, taking in the full scope of the destruction. Laughter erupted nearby, and his head snapped toward the sound. 6 men loitered by his fence, their bald heads glinting in the afternoon sun. Tattoos of swastikas and other hateful symbols marked their arms and necks. They leaned casually, smirking as they drank from cans and admired their handiwork. One of them tipped his beer in mock salute. "Hey there, Marine. Like the welcome back gift?" Another laughed, kicking a crumpled soda can onto the lawn. "Figured you'd appreciate the personal touch." Jamal's voice erupted, raw and sharp. "Get off my property. Now!" The group froze momentarily, startled by the outburst. Before the leader, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. His smirk widened. "Or what?" he taunted, spreading his arms wide. "You gonna call the cops? Good luck with that. They won't lift a finger for the likes of you." The men laughed, their mockery biting and confident. Jamal's fists clenched at his sides, his military training at war with his rising fury. This wasn't fear. This wasn't hesitation. It was restraint. For now, the gang didn't move. If anything, they seemed emboldened by Jamal's anger, feeding off it like a pack of predators catching the scent of blood. The leader, Scarface and swaggering, stepped closer, his beer can dangling carelessly from his fingers. "Relax, Marine," he said, his tone mocking. "We're just having a little fun. You don't have to get all angry about it." He dragged the word out, smirking as the others chuckled behind him. Jamal stood his ground, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to contain the fire burning in his veins. "This is my home," he said, his voice low but firm. "You have no right to be here. Leave. Now. Leave. Now." One of the men parroted in a high-pitched voice, earning laughter from the group. "You hear that?" Another chimed in, grinning. "He thinks he owns this place." The leader stopped a few feet away, tossing his empty beer can onto the lawn. "Let me tell you how it works around here," he said, pointing a finger at Jamal. "We decide who stays and who goes. And guess what? You don't belong here." Jamal's jaw tightened. He could feel his muscles coiling, every instinct screaming at him to act. But he held back. "You're trespassing," he said through gritted teeth. "I'm telling you one last time. Get off my property." The leader tilted his head, feigning confusion. "Your property?" He looked back at his crew, a mock expression of shock on his face. "Did you guys know this was his property?" Sure doesn't look like it, one of them called out, gesturing to the graffiti. Looks more like ours now. Scarface grinned. See, Marine, we're doing you a favor, helping you realize this isn't your home anymore. This town, it doesn't want you. Jamal took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. You're done. Leave. The laughter stopped. The men exchanged glances, the air growing heavier with tension. You got a lot of nerve, Scarface said, his grin fading. Thinking you can talk to us like that. You think that uniform makes you untouchable? He took a step closer, invading Jamal's space. Let me tell you something, Marine. You might scare people out there. But here, you're just another— Jamal's hand shot up, stopping Scarface mid-sentence as he pointed toward the fence. You've got 10 seconds to walk off my property. Scarface hesitated, his eyes flicking to Jamal's hand. For the first time, the smirk faltered, replaced by something darker. You think you're tough, huh? He spat. One of the men behind him muttered, Maybe we should— Shut up, Scarface snapped without turning. He locked eyes with Jamal again, his lips curling into a sneer. We'll go. For now. But you'd better believe we're not done here. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. This town doesn't want you, Marine. And we'll make sure you get the message. The gang turned and began to walk away, but not before one of them picked up a bottle and hurled it at Jamal's porch. It shattered against the wood, scattering glass across the steps. They laughed as they disappeared down the street, their voices echoing in the stillness. Jamal stayed rooted in place, his fists clenched so tightly, his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded in his ears, the words they'd spat replaying in his mind. He forced himself to breathe, but the rage bubbling beneath the surface refused to settle. He turned back toward his house, the sight of the graffiti and destruction twisting the knife in his chest. This wasn't just an attack on his property. It was an attack on everything he'd worked for, everything he stood for. Jamal walked up the steps, carefully stepping over the shards of broken glass. His hand hovered over the door handle, but he didn't go inside. He couldn't, not yet. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Jamal stood on his porch, staring at the wreckage of his home. The hateful graffiti, the shattered glass, the scorched remnants of his welcome mat. It all felt like a slap in the face. His chest heaved as he struggled to rein in the fury boiling inside him. He had risked his life for this country, fought in far-off lands so people could enjoy freedoms they took for granted. And now, back on his own soil, this was his welcome? Not just vandalism, but rejection. Pure and venomous. A burst of laughter echoed from down the street, sharp and taunting. Jamal turned his head, spotting them. The gang of bald men clustered around an old truck at the corner. They leaned against it, passing beers between them, laughing like they'd just won some victory. The rage became a roaring inferno. He didn't hesitate. His boots struck the gravel hard as he stormed toward them, his strides long and purposeful. Hey! Jamal's voice rang out like a command, sharp and undeniable. The gang turned, their laughter fading into smirks as they saw him approaching. For a moment, their eyes flickered with uncertainty. But then Scarface, the leader, stepped forward, his grin widening. Well, look who's back, Scarface drawled, tossing his beer can onto the ground. What's the matter, Marine? Not happy with the improvements we made? Jamal stopped a few feet away, his fists clenched at his sides. His voice was steady, but the fury behind it was unmistakable. I fought for this country, for people like you to live free. And this is how you repay me? By trashing my home, spreading your hate? You think this makes you strong? Scarface let out a laugh, looking back at his crew. Oh, he's got a speech ready. Did you rehearse that in the mirror, Marine? You've made your point, Jamal said, his voice lowering to a dangerous calm. Now leave. This is your last chance. The gang exchanged glances, their smirks growing. Leave, Scarface said, stepping closer. You don't give the orders here. You don't belong here, Marine. This is our town now. One of the men chimed in, sneering. Yeah, Maybe it's time you got the message, Scarface chuckled, shoving Jamal's shoulder. Go on, Marine. Show us how tough you really are. Jamal's patience snapped. His fist connected with Scarface's jaw with the force of a sledgehammer. The leader stumbled back, a look of stunned rage spreading across his face as he clutched his cheek. You son of a… Scarface lunged, but Jamal was faster. He sidestepped the attack, grabbing Scarface's arm and twisting it. The leader cried out as Jamal shoved him to the ground. The rest of the gang didn't hesitate. They rushed forward, their shouts mixing with the sound of crunching gravel. Jamal ducked under a wild swing, delivering a sharp elbow to another man's ribs. The thug doubled over with a grunt as Jamal pivoted to face the next attacker. A punch grazed his shoulder, but Jamal caught the man's wrist, twisting it until he dropped to one knee. With a quick shove, Jamal sent him sprawling onto the asphalt. Come on! One of the remaining men shouted, charging forward. He swung a beer bottle, but Jamal deflected it, the glass shattering against the pavement. Jamal's knee came up, driving into the man's stomach and sending him staggering back. Scarface climbed to his feet, his face red with fury. You're gonna regret that, Marine, he bellowed, grabbing a tire iron from the truck bed. Jamal turned just in time to see him swing. He ducked, the iron whistling through the air above his head. The gang pressed in, surrounding him, their movements chaotic but coordinated. Jamal's mind clicked into combat mode. His military training took over, every strike, block, and movement precise and efficient. He swept a man's legs out from under him, dodged a punch from another, and delivered a quick jab to his jaw. The sound of shouting grew louder as the gang refused to back down. Jamal's focus never wavered, his breathing steady despite the chaos. He knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Scarface swung the tire iron again, forcing Jamal to step back. Another man took the opportunity to lunge at him, but Jamal spun, using the momentum to toss the attacker into Scarface. Both men hit the ground in a heap. Enough! Jamal barked, his voice ringing out like a drill sergeant's command. The gang hesitated, panting and battered, but their defiance hadn't waned. Scarface climbed to his feet again, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. You think this is over? He spat, gripping the tire iron tightly. We're just getting started. Jamal squared his shoulders, his gaze unflinching. Then, come and finish it. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. Scarface wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his hand, his eyes blazing with hatred. He hefted the tire iron, pointing it at Jamal like a weapon. You think you're something special? You're nothing but a loudmouth in a uniform. Jamal didn't flinch, his stance solid as a mountain. His voice was calm, but carried an edge that cut through the tension. You don't know who you're messing with, he said, his eyes fixed on Scarface. I've served in some of the deadliest places on Earth. I've faced men far tougher than you, and left them in the dirt. Scarface let out a harsh laugh. Oh, you're a big, bad Marine. That's supposed to scare us? One of the other men chimed in, sneering. We're not scared of some government puppet. Jamal's gaze swept across the group, his calm demeanor only amplifying the threat in his voice. You should be, he said. You think your numbers make you strong? All I see are a bunch of cowards who gang up on people to feel big. Scarface growled and swung the tire iron again. This time, Jamal sidestepped with precision, his hand shooting out to grab Scarface's wrist. With a sharp twist, the tire iron clattered to the ground. Before Scarface could react, Jamal drove a fist into his stomach, sending him staggering back, gasping for air. Is that all you've got? Jamal taunted, stepping forward. I expected more from the big man who thinks he runs this town. Get him! One of the men yelled, and the rest of the gang charged. Jamal moved like a predator among prey. One man swung wildly, but Jamal ducked, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. I've taken down entire squads of armed fighters, Jamal growled, slamming the man into the side of the truck. What chance do you think you have? Another thug tried to blindside him with a punch, but Jamal spun, delivering a brutal elbow to the man's jaw. The thug crumpled to the ground, groaning. You wanted to see how tough I am? Jamal said, standing over him. "You're getting your lesson now." Scarface, still wheezing, barked out, "Don't let him scare you. He's just one guy." The remaining men hesitated, but one, emboldened by Scarface's words, grabbed a crowbar from the truck bed and lunged. Jamal caught the movement in his peripheral vision. He stepped aside, the crowbar swinging harmlessly past him, and landed a punishing blow to the attacker's ribs. "Do you even understand who I am?" Jamal said, his voice rising over the chaos. He turned to Scarface, his eyes blazing with controlled fury. "I've spent my life training for moments like this. I've taken lives to protect this country. You don't scare me. You're nothing but a bunch of ignorant punks." Scarface's face twisted in rage, and he grabbed a metal chain from the truck. He swung it at Jamal, but the Marine ducked under the arc and closed the distance. With a swift motion, Jamal yanked the chain from Scarface's hands and threw it to the ground. "You think hate makes you strong," Jamal said, grabbing Scarface by the collar and pulling him close. "It doesn't. It makes you weak, and I'm here to show you just how weak you are." With a powerful shove, he sent Scarface stumbling into one of his own men, knocking them both to the ground. The fight continued to rage, the gang refusing to back down despite their obvious disadvantage. Jamal's every move was calculated, his strikes precise and devastating. A kick to one man's chest sent him sprawling onto the pavement. A swift uppercut dropped another where he stood. "You're all out of your depth," Jamal said, his voice cutting through the grunts and groans of the battered gang. "You thought you could intimidate me? Terrorize my community? You're about to learn what happens when you pick the wrong fight." Scarface staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his mouth. His bravado was crumbling, but his arrogance hadn't completely faded. "We're not done yet," he spat, his voice slurring slightly. Jamal took a step toward him, his presence overwhelming. "Oh, you're done," he said, his tone like steel. "But if you're too stupid to see it, I'll be happy to make it clear." Two of the gang members tried to grab Jamal from behind, but he spun, slamming an elbow into one man's face and delivering a punishing knee to the other's stomach. They dropped like sacks of flour, groaning and clutching their injuries. Scarface stood frozen, his bravado finally giving way to fear. Jamal advanced on him, his voice low and deadly. "I warned you. I gave you every chance to walk away, but you wouldn't listen." Scarface tried to backpedal, but Jamal grabbed him by the front of his shirt. "Now you're going to pay for your arrogance." The gang wasn't done yet. They were regrouping, their stubborn defiance keeping them in the fight. But Jamal wasn't going to stop until they understood just how outmatched they were. Jamal's focus was razor-sharp as he moved through the chaos, his military training turning the fight into a precise, calculated dismantling of the gang. The 6 men charged at him with the desperation of cornered animals, but Jamal had seen this kind of chaos before, and conquered it. One of the men swung wildly, his fist aiming for Jamal's jaw, but the Marine ducked with practiced ease. Jamal countered with a brutal uppercut that snapped the man's head back, sending him crumpling to the ground. "You wanted a fight," Jamal growled, stepping over the fallen man. "Here it is." Another thug lunged with a crowbar, yelling incoherently. Jamal sidestepped, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it until the weapon clattered to the ground. "You're not built for this," Jamal said coldly, driving his knee into the man's stomach. The thug wheezed and dropped to his knees, gasping for air. 2 more rushed him at the same time, trying to use their numbers to their advantage. Jamal ducked low, sweeping one man's legs out from under him before delivering a sharp elbow to the other's ribs. The first man hit the ground hard, groaning as he clutched his leg, while the second stumbled back, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Scarface stood off to the side, his face twisted in anger as he watched his crew fall one by one. "Get up, you idiots!" he barked, but his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. Jamal's gaze snapped to him, his eyes cold and unrelenting. "They're done," he said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "And you're next." The remaining 2 men hesitated, their earlier confidence replaced with unease. One tried to rally, charging at Jamal with a broken beer bottle. Jamal caught his arm mid-swing, twisting it until the man howled in pain and dropped the weapon. "You're out of your league," Jamal said, shoving him into the side of the truck. The last man tried to grab Jamal from behind, but the Marine spun and delivered a swift kick to his chest. The man stumbled back, tripping over the fallen bodies of his friends and landing hard on the pavement. Scarface's bravado was cracking. The gang leader took a step back, glancing at the scattered remains of his crew. 5 men lay groaning on the ground, beaten and broken, their earlier arrogance shattered. Jamal advanced on Scarface, his movements deliberate. "This is what happens when you let hate blind you," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You thought you could intimidate me? You thought you could break me?" Scarface gritted his teeth, his hands curling into fists. "You're gonna regret this," he spat. But the words rang hollow. Jamal didn't give him a chance to backpedal. He grabbed the front of Scarface's shirt and pulled him close. "I've fought real battles. I've faced men who knew what they were doing. You're just a scared little boy trying to act tough." With that, Jamal drove a fist into Scarface's stomach, then released him, letting the gang leader collapse to his knees. Scarface gasped for air, clutching his midsection as he glared up at Jamal. "Stay down!" Jamal ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. Scarface's face twisted in rage, but he didn't respond. The fight seemed over. Jamal surveyed the scene, his breathing steady as the adrenaline began to ebb. 6 men lay sprawled on the ground, too beaten to move. It wasn't a victory Jamal had sought, but it was one they'd forced him to deliver. Just as Jamal turned to step back, a searing pain exploded at the back of his head. His vision blurred, and he stumbled forward, his ears ringing. Scarface stood behind him, clutching a metal pipe, his face twisted in triumph. "Not so tough now, are you?" he snarled, raising the pipe for another swing. Jamal dropped to one knee, shaking his head to clear the haze. The gang, emboldened by the surprise attack, scrambled to their feet. Despite their injuries, they rallied around Scarface, their defiance rekindled. "Let's go!" Scarface barked, pulling his crew toward the truck. "This isn't over, Marine. You hear me? This isn't over." The gang piled into the truck, their movements frantic as they started the engine. Jamal struggled to stand, blood trickling down the side of his face, but his glare never left the vehicle. Scarface leaned out of the window as the truck sped away. "We'll be back for you!" he shouted, his voice fading into the distance. Jamal stood in the middle of the street, his vision clearing as the roar of the truck's engine disappeared. He wiped the blood from his temple, his jaw tightening. They thought they'd won something. They thought they could run. But Jamal Hayes wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The sound of the truck's engine faded into the distance, leaving only the faint rustle of the wind and the scattered groans of the battered gang members lying in the street. Jamal stood there for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides, blood dripping from a cut on his temple. His head throbbed where the metal pipe had struck him, the pain radiating down his neck. Slowly, he turned and made his way back toward his house. Every step felt heavier than the last, his body aching from the fight. He reached the porch, his boots crunching over shards of broken glass. The sight of the graffiti and destruction twisted his stomach into knots. He leaned against the door frame, taking a moment to catch his breath. His reflection in the cracked window caught his eye. Blood smeared down the side of his face, his shirt torn, bruises already forming along his jaw. He looked like he'd been through a war zone. Jamal pushed open the door and stepped inside. The house was silent, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. He walked into the kitchen, each movement slow and deliberate. Reaching into a cabinet, he pulled out a first aid kit and set it on the counter. He caught his reflection again, this time in the small kitchen window above the sink. His expression was hard, his jaw set in a grim line. "Some welcome home," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. Jamal sat down at the table and opened the kit. He grabbed a cloth, wet it with rubbing alcohol, and pressed it to the cut on his temple. The sting was sharp, making him wince. but he didn't pull away. Pain was something he'd learned to live with. As he worked, his mind replayed the fight over and over, the way the gang had taunted him, the sheer arrogance in Scarface's voice as he spat threats. They hadn't just tried to hurt him physically. They'd wanted to break him, to make him feel powerless in his own home. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. Jamal's hand tightened around the cloth, his knuckles turning white. They thought they could run, that they could regroup and come back stronger. But this wasn't over. Not for them, and not for him. He stood and walked to the living room, looking out the window at the damage they'd left behind. The graffiti on the walls, the shattered bottle on the porch, the scorched marks on the wood. It wasn't just vandalism. It was a declaration of war. Jamal exhaled sharply, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. He couldn't let them win. Not here. Not in the town he'd come to call home. He'd fought too hard, given too much, to let a gang of cowards take it all away. He went back to the kitchen and rinsed the blood from his hands, the water running red before fading to clear. As he dried them off, his phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, seeing a message from his sister, Lena. Lena, hey, just checking in. Are you home yet? Jamal stared at the screen for a moment before typing back, Yeah, I'm home. He hesitated, then added, We need to talk. He set the phone down and looked back out the window. The gang might have scattered, but they'd be back. Scarface had made that clear. And next time, they wouldn't come with just fists and beer bottles. Jamal leaned against the counter, his mind already working through the possibilities. He needed to be ready, not just for himself, but for the community. This wasn't just about his house or his pride anymore. He thought about the other families in the neighborhood, the ones who didn't have the training or the resources to fight back. The gang wasn't just targeting him. They were sending a message to everyone who didn't fit their twisted vision of the town. Jamal straightened, his resolve hardening. If they wanted to send a message, he'd send one of his own. And it wouldn't be subtle. He walked to the living room and grabbed a pen and notepad from the small desk by the window. Sitting down, he began making a list. Names, plans, contingencies. He wasn't going to wait for them to strike again. He'd take the fight to them, but first, he needed to recover. He touched the bandage on his temple, his jaw clenching. The pain didn't matter. It never did. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jamal sat in his living room, the notepad on his lap filled with hastily scribbled notes and plans. His head still throbbed from the blows Scarface had landed, but the pain only fueled his resolve. He heard the crunch of tires outside and glanced out the window. A familiar car pulled into the driveway. A few moments later, there was a knock at the door. Jamal stood, walking over and opening it to find his sister, Lena, standing there. Her eyes immediately scanned his face, widening as she took in the fresh cut on his temple and the bruises along his jaw. Jamal, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. What happened? Are you okay? I'm fine, he said, shutting the door behind her. Fine? Lena turned to him, her hands on her hips. You look like you've been through a war zone. What happened? He exhaled sharply and gestured for her to sit. Some gang came to the house, vandalized it, tried to intimidate me. It didn't end well for them. Lena sank into the couch, her brows furrowing. The gang? You mean those skinheads who've been terrorizing the neighborhood? Jamal nodded, sitting across from her. You know about them? Lena leaned forward, her voice dropping as she spoke. Everyone knows about them. They've been targeting black families for months now, slashing tires, breaking windows, spray painting slurs on houses. A few families even left town because they were scared. And the cops? She shook her head, her frustration evident. They do nothing. If anything, they make it worse by ignoring the reports or blaming the victims. Jamal's jaw tightened. He had suspected this wasn't an isolated incident, but hearing it confirmed hit harder than he expected. How long has this been going on? Since late last year, Lena said. It started with small things. Trash dumped on lawns, notes left on cars. Then it escalated. People's pets went missing. A church got vandalized. And then people started disappearing. Jamal's eyes narrowed. Disappearing? She nodded grimly. 2 men, both black, both outspoken about the racism in town. One was a pastor. The other worked at the community center. They went missing within weeks of each other. The police called it unrelated, but no one here believes that. A cold rage settled in Jamal's chest, his hands clenching into fists. And no one's done anything to stop them? Lena sighed, running a hand through her hair. Some of us tried. We've held meetings, protests, but it feels like we're shouting into the void. The gang isn't just a bunch of random thugs. They're organized. They have money, connections, and they're protected. Protected by who? Jamal asked, his voice sharp. The people in power, Lena said bitterly. Some of the city council members, even a few cops, they pretend they don't know what's happening, but it's obvious they're turning a blind eye, or worse, helping. Jamal leaned back, his mind racing. This wasn't just a group of ignorant punks. This was systemic, coordinated, and it wasn't going to stop unless someone forced it to. Lena's voice softened. I'm glad you're back, Jamal. People are scared, and I don't blame them. This gang has everyone on edge. But you're not like the rest of us. You can do something. Jamal met her gaze. The determination in his eyes mirrored in hers. You're damn right I can do something. This stops now. Lena hesitated, then leaned forward, her hand resting on his arm. Just be careful, okay? These people aren't like the ones you've faced before. They don't fight fair. I know, Jamal said, his voice steady. But I don't need them to fight fair. I just need them to show their faces. Lena sighed, leaning back. You always did have a way of throwing yourself into things head first. It's not just about me, Jamal said. It's about everyone they've hurt. Everyone they've scared into silence. They think they can terrorize people and get away with it. That ends here. Lena watched him for a long moment, then nodded. If anyone can stop them, it's you. Jamal stood, pacing toward the window. His mind was already working through the possibilities. Do you know where they hang out? Where they operate? Lena hesitated, then nodded. There's an abandoned farm a few miles out of town. People say that's where they meet. It's isolated. Barns, sheds, plenty of space to hide. Jamal turned to her, his expression grim but resolute. It's more than a start. It's where this fight begins. Lena stood, watching him with a mix of worry and pride. Just promise me one thing. Don't get yourself killed. We've already lost too much. I promise, Jamal said. But I can't let this go. Not after what they've done. She nodded, hugging him briefly before heading to the door. Call me if you need anything. And Jamal? Yeah? Show them what real strength looks like. He gave her a faint smile. Oh, they'll learn, one way or another. As the door closed behind her, Jamal turned back to his notepad. This wasn't just about retaliation anymore. This was war. Jamal sat at his kitchen table, his notepad in front of him, filled with half-formed plans and names. His mind raced, piecing together a strategy, but he knew he couldn't do this alone. The gang wasn't just a handful of thugs. It was part of something bigger. He needed backup. He scrolled through his phone, landing on the names of 2 people he could trust with his life. Corporal Zane Carter and Sergeant Travis Lang. Both were Marines he'd served with on multiple deployments. They weren't just skilled, they were loyal. Brothers, forged in fire. Jamal hesitated for a moment, then dialed Zane's number. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Carter here. Zane, it's Jamal. Jamal? Man, it's been a minute. How's leave treating you? Could be better, Jamal said, his voice clipped. Listen, I need your help. There was a pause on the other end. Help? What's going on? Jamal leaned back, running a hand over his face. There's a gang in my town. Racist. Violent. They've been terrorizing black families. Vandalism. Threats. People going missing. Tonight, they came after me. Wait, Zane interrupted. They came after you? Are you okay? I'm fine, Jamal said. But this isn't just about me. These guys are organized. They've got connections, resources, and they're trying to push every black person out of town. Zane exhaled sharply. Damn, that's serious. But, Jamal, what exactly are you asking for? I need you here, Jamal said bluntly. I'm going after them. They've got a hideout at an abandoned farm a few miles out of town. I can't take them on alone. The line went quiet. Zane? Man, you know I've got your back, Zane said finally, his voice hesitant. But this isn't like a deployment. We're not in a war zone anymore. If something goes sideways, there's no command, no extraction. This is risky. Hell, it's dangerous. Jamal's grip tightened on the phone. You think I don't know that? I've faced danger my whole life. This isn't about glory or adrenaline. This is about saving people. If we don't stop them, more families will suffer. More lives will be destroyed. Zane sighed. And you're sure about this? Dead sure, Jamal said. I can't stand by and do nothing. Not when I have the skills to make a difference. There was a long pause. Then Zane spoke again. All right, I'll be there. Just tell me when and where. Thanks, man, Jamal said, relief washing over him. I'll text you the details. He hung up and immediately called Travis Lang. The phone rang longer this time, and for a moment, Jamal thought it would go to voicemail. Lang, a gruff voice answered. Travis, it's Jamal. Hayes? What's up, brother? Jamal didn't waste time. I need your help. There's a gang here, targeting black families. Tonight, they came after me. I fought them off, but it's bigger than just me. They've been terrorizing the community for months, and no one's doing anything to stop them. Travis grunted. Sounds bad. What are you thinking? I've got a lead on where they operate. An abandoned farm outside town. I'm putting together a team to take them down, but I need you. Travis was silent for a moment. You're serious about this? Dead serious. You know how these things go, Jamal. It's messy. Dangerous. You sure you're ready to deal with that again? Because once you cross that line, I've already crossed it, Jamal interrupted. Tonight, they tried to intimidate me. Next time, it'll be someone who can't fight back. This isn't just a fight. It's a chance to protect people who can't protect themselves. Travis sighed heavily. Damn it, Hayes. You always did have a hero complex. It's not about being a hero, Jamal said, his voice firm. It's about doing what's right. These people need help, Travis. And if we don't step up, who will? Another long pause. Then Travis chuckled softly. All right, you've got me. When do we start? Tomorrow night, Jamal said. I'll send you the details. Got it, Travis said. Just don't get yourself killed, all right? I've seen enough good men go down. I'm not planning on dying, Jamal said. But if I do, I'll make sure to take as many of them with me as I can. They exchanged a few more words before hanging up. Jamal set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. His body ached and his head still throbbed, but for the first time that night, he felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone in this fight. And with Zane and Travis by his side, the gang wouldn't know what hit them. The next evening, Jamal stood in his living room, staring at the map spread out on the coffee table. Marked with circles and lines, it detailed the farm Lena had described. It wasn't just a single barn, it was a sprawling property with multiple buildings, fences, and plenty of cover for the gang to hide behind. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Jamal opened it to find Zane and Travis standing on the porch, their expressions grim but determined. Zane, tall and lean with sharp eyes, carried a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Travis, stockier and weathered, had a steely calm about him that Jamal had always relied on. Glad you could make it, Jamal said, stepping aside to let them in. Zane dropped the bag onto the floor with a thud. You didn't exactly give us much of a choice, he said, smirking faintly. You know I wouldn't have called unless it was serious, Jamal replied, closing the door behind them. Travis glanced around the room, his eyes landing on the map. So, this is it? He asked, walking over to the coffee table. Jamal nodded. The farm. Lena says it's their main hangout. They've been using it to plan their attacks, stockpile weapons, and meet with other groups. Zane crouched down, studying the map. It's got good cover. Too good. If we go in loud, they'll scatter before we can get to the core group. That's why we're not going in loud, Jamal said. He gestured to the map, pointing at specific spots. There's a back entrance here, past the tree line. It's overgrown, so they probably don't use it much. If we move in quietly, we can take out their sentries and cut off their escape routes. Travis crossed his arms, frowning. How many are we talking about? Hard to say, Jamal admitted. But Scarface's crew isn't the only group that uses this place. It could be a dozen, maybe more. Zane let out a low whistle. We're 3 against 12. Those are some steep odds. Jamal's gaze hardened. We've faced worse. Travis glanced at him, his expression serious. True, but this isn't a war zone, Jamal. We don't have backup. No medevacs. No air support. I know what this is, Jamal said firmly. And I know what's at stake. These guys aren't just thugs. They're part of something bigger. Zane's head snapped up. What do you mean, bigger? Jamal leaned over the map, his voice dropping. Lena told me the gang isn't working alone. They've got funding, connections, people in power who are either turning a blind eye or actively supporting them. That farm? It's not just a hideout. It's where they meet with those people. If we don't take this entire operation apart, it'll just grow back stronger. Travis grunted, his jaw tightening. So, we're not just dealing with the gang. We're dealing with whoever's backing them. Exactly, Jamal said. That's why we can't go in blind. We need to gather intel, figure out who's pulling the strings. The farm is the first step, but it won't be the last. Zane exhaled sharply. All right. What's the plan? Jamal outlined the strategy, his voice calm and steady. We move in under cover of darkness. Zane, you'll handle surveillance. Use the drone to get a layout of the property and pinpoint their positions. Travis, you're on entry with me. We'll take out the sentries first, then work our way toward the main barn. Travis nodded. What about weapons? Jamal gestured to Zane's duffel bag. I've got a few things ready, but I figured you'd come prepared. Zane grinned, unzipping the bag to reveal an array of gear. Handguns, knives, and a compact drone. Thought I'd bring a little something for everyone. Jamal picked up a knife, testing its weight in his hand. This'll do. Travis grabbed a handgun, checking the magazine. And if things go sideways, then we adapt, Jamal said. We've done it before. We can do it again. Zane raised an eyebrow. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, Jamal admitted, but it's necessary. The 3 men exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. They'd been in this position before. Outnumbered, outgunned, and with no guarantee of success. But they'd always come through. As they finalized the plan, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room. Jamal felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, tempered by the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just a mission. It was a fight for justice, for the people who couldn't fight for themselves. When everything was ready, Jamal stood and faced his team. We move out in an hour. Stay sharp, stay quiet, and remember why we're doing this. Zane smirked, his usual cocky confidence showing through. Don't worry, Hayes. We've got your back. Travis clapped him on the shoulder. Let's finish this. As they prepared to leave, Jamal looked out the window toward the darkened horizon. The farm was waiting. So was the gang. And somewhere out there, the people funding their hate were watching. They had no idea what was coming. The night was moonless, the sky a blanket of darkness that cloaked Jamal and his team as they crept through the overgrown tree line. The abandoned farm lay ahead, its silhouette barely visible against the horizon. Dim lights glowed from inside the barn and one of the smaller buildings, casting faint beams across the dirt lot. Jamal held up a fist, signaling his team to stop. Zane crouched beside him, already pulling the compact drone from his pack. Travis knelt slightly behind, his eyes scanning the area for movement. 2 sentries, Zane whispered, pointing toward the barn. Jamal followed his finger and spotted them. A pair of men with flashlights, their beams cutting through the dark as they patrolled the perimeter. Jamal nodded. Keep it quiet. We can't alert the others. Zane launched the drone, its quiet hum blending into the night. The small device zipped upward, hovering just above the treetops before gliding toward the farm. Through his tablet, Zane had a bird's-eye view of the property. All right, Zane murmured, eyes fixed on the screen. Main barn's got 3 guys inside, armed. Looks like they're sorting through crates. Probably weapons. Jamal leaned over to glance at the screen. What about the smaller building? Hold on, Zane said, steering the drone toward the shed. The camera zoomed in, revealing a group of men seated around a table. Papers and maps were spread out before them, and one of them, dressed in a suit, an odd contrast to the others, was speaking animatedly. Well, that's interesting, Zane muttered. Jamal's eyes narrowed. Who's the guy in the suit? No idea, but he doesn't look like the typical muscle, Zane said. This guy's giving orders. Travis leaned closer, his voice low. Could be one of their funders. A handler, maybe. Jamal's jaw tightened. If that was true, this was bigger than they'd thought. This wasn't just a gang terrorizing a town. This was an organized operation with leadership and resources coming from outside. Focus on the maps, Jamal said. Can you get a closer look? Zane maneuvered the drone lower, its camera zooming in on the table. The images were grainy, but clear enough to make out roadways, town layouts, and several locations marked with red X's. They're planning something, Zane whispered. Looks like coordinated attacks. Businesses, homes, maybe even churches. Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. They were gearing up for all-out terror. Download the footage, Jamal said. We'll need it later. Already on it, Zane replied, his fingers flying over the screen. Jamal turned his attention back to the sentries. The men were pacing slowly, their flashlights sweeping the area but not venturing too far from the barn. Travis, Jamal said, his voice low but firm. We're taking them out. Quietly. Travis gave a curt nod, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. On your lead. Jamal moved first, his steps silent, as he approached the nearest sentry. The man's flashlight bobbed slightly with his movements, his focus on the ground rather than his surroundings. Jamal closed the distance in seconds, his arm shooting out to wrap around the man's neck. With a quick, calculated motion, he pulled the sentry into the shadows, rendering him unconscious. Travis took down the second sentry just as efficiently, his knife glinting briefly in the faint light before the man slumped to the ground. Clear, Travis whispered. Jamal signaled Zane to move forward. The drone returned to its case as Zane slung his gear over his shoulder and joined them. Crates in the barn, intel in the shed, Zane said. What's the play? Jamal thought for a moment, his mind racing. We secure the shed first. If that guy in the suit is a handler, we can't let him slip away. Travis, you're with me. Zane, keep watch and alert us if anyone comes near. Zane nodded. Got it. Jamal and Travis crept toward the shed, their movements precise and silent. They positioned themselves by the door, listening to the voices inside. The man in the suit was still speaking, his tone sharp and authoritative. This is just the beginning, the man said, his voice muffled but clear enough to make out. The next phase starts tomorrow night. We'll hit the targets simultaneously. Make sure the shipments are ready by morning. Jamal exchanged a glance with Travis, their suspicions confirmed. This wasn't just a local problem. It was a well-coordinated operation with far-reaching implications. On my count, Jamal whispered. Travis nodded, gripping his weapon tightly. Jamal held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. They moved as one, bursting into the shed with weapons drawn. The men inside froze, their faces a mix of shock and confusion. Hands up! Jamal barked. Nobody moves. The man in the suit raised his hands slowly, his expression more annoyed than frightened. You have no idea what you're getting into, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Jamal stepped closer, his gaze like steel. No, you don't. The shed fell silent as Jamal's voice echoed in the small, cramped space. The 4 men seated at the table froze, their eyes darting between the armed Marines. The man in the suit didn't flinch, his sharp eyes narrowing as he studied Jamal. I said, hands up! Jamal barked again, his weapon trained on the group. Slowly, the men raised their hands, their expressions ranging from fear to defiance. The man in the suit, however, looked more irritated than intimidated. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice calm but laced with venom. You don't know who you're dealing with. Jamal stepped closer, his gaze never leaving the man. And you don't know who I am. You're going to tell me everything I need to know, or this is going to get a lot worse for you. The man sneered. You think you can stop this? You're just 3 men. This operation is bigger than you, bigger than this town. Taking me down won't make a difference. Jamal's lips curled into a faint smile, cold and humorless. Let me worry about that. Start talking. One of the other men at the table, a younger thug with a nervous twitch, glanced at the suit, then back at Jamal. He's right, the thug blurted. This isn't just local. We've got— Shut up! The suit snapped, glaring at him. Jamal shifted his weapon toward the younger man. Keep going. The thug swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. There's shipments coming in. Money, supplies, weapons. They're funding everything from out of state. The guy in charge, A loud crash outside cut him off. Jamal and Travis snapped their heads toward the door as Zane's voice crackled through the comms. Trouble, Zane hissed. We've got incoming. Multiple hostiles. Looks like reinforcements. Damn it, Jamal muttered, turning back to the group at the table. Tie them up, he said to Travis. Travis moved quickly, securing the men with zip ties from his pack. The man in the suit glared at Jamal, his voice calm despite the situation. You won't get far. They'll find you. Jamal leaned in close, his voice low and threatening. We'll see who finds who. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Jamal grabbed a stack of papers and maps from the table, stuffing them into his bag. Move, he ordered Travis. The two exited the shed, crouching low as they scanned the area. Zane's voice crackled again through the comms. They've got trucks pulling up. I'm falling back to the tree line. Wait, no, they've got me. Zane! Jamal called into the comms, but there was no response. Travis cursed under his breath. They got him. Jamal's jaw clenched, his mind racing. He looked toward the barn, where several men were dragging Zane toward one of the trucks. The drone operator was struggling, his arms pinned behind him, but the gang outnumbered him 5-1. Damn it, Jamal growled. We can't leave him, Travis said, his voice tense. Jamal scanned the scene, weighing their options. The reinforcements were too many to take head-on. He turned to Travis, his voice steady despite the urgency. We'll get him back, but we can't do it here. We're outnumbered and outgunned. Travis looked ready to argue, but nodded. What's the plan? Fall back to the rendezvous point, Jamal said. We regroup, go over the intel, and figure out where they're taking him. And if they don't take him anywhere, they will, Jamal said firmly. He's valuable to them now. They'll want to know what he saw, what he knows. We'll use that to our advantage. Travis hesitated, then gave a curt nod. The two moved quickly but quietly, slipping back into the tree line. The sound of engines roared to life behind them as the gang mobilized. Jamal glanced back, his gut twisting at the sight of Zane being shoved into one of the trucks. They'd get him back. As they reached the edge of the property, Jamal and Travis broke into a jog, putting as much distance between themselves and the farm as possible. The rendezvous point wasn't far, a secluded spot by a dried-up creek bed, surrounded by thick brush. When they arrived, Jamal dropped his bag onto the ground and pulled out the maps and papers. He spread them out, his sharp eyes scanning for anything that could give them a lead. Anything useful? Travis asked, catching his breath. Looks like it, Jamal said, pointing to a series of markings on one of the maps. There's another location circled here. Could be where they're taking Zane. Travis leaned over, his expression grim. What if it's a trap? Jamal met his gaze. Doesn't matter. We're getting him back. The dried creek bed was eerily quiet, the faint rustle of leaves in the night breeze the only sound. Jamal crouched by the spread of maps and papers, his jaw clenched as he scanned the intel they'd pulled from the shed. A marked location stood out, a storage facility on the outskirts of the neighboring town, circled in red ink. Travis leaned against a nearby tree, keeping an eye on the perimeter. He glanced at Jamal, who hadn't spoken much since they'd reached the rendezvous point. You all right? Travis asked finally, breaking the silence. Jamal didn't look up. No, he said flatly. Travis sighed, pushing off the tree and walking closer. We'll get him back, Jamal. You know that. Jamal's hand tightened around the paper he was holding, crumpling the edge slightly. I shouldn't have let this happen, he muttered. You didn't let anything happen, Travis said, his voice steady. Zane knew the risks. We all did. Jamal finally looked up, his eyes dark with frustration and guilt. I called him here, Travis. I brought him into this. He trusted me. And now he's in their hands. Do you have any idea what they'll do to him? Travis crouched down across from him, his gaze unwavering. I do. And so do you. That's why we'll get him back. Jamal shook his head, his anger bubbling to the surface. I should have seen it coming. I should have been faster. Smarter. I let them take him. Travis leaned forward, his voice firm but not unkind. You didn't let anything happen, Jamal. These people are organized, and they're dangerous. Blaming yourself isn't going to help Zane. What's going to help him is us getting our heads straight and doing what we do best. Jamal exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. The tension in his shoulders didn't ease, but he nodded. You're right, he admitted reluctantly. But it doesn't make this any easier. It's not supposed to be easy, Travis said. If it were, we wouldn't be here. But you've faced worse, and so has Zane. He's tough. He can hold out until we get to him. Jamal stared at the map again, his jaw tightening. This place, he said, tapping the circled location. It has to be where they took him. It's isolated, and it matches what we've seen so far. If they're holding him anywhere, it's there. Travis peered at the map, nodding slowly. Looks defensible. Probably another group there. Reinforcements. Good, Jamal said, his voice hardening. The more of them we take out, the better. This isn't just about getting Zane back. It's about dismantling their operation piece by piece. Travis raised an eyebrow. You sure you're ready for this? You're running on fumes, and we're outnumbered. Again, Jamal looked up at him, his eyes blazing with determination. I don't care how tired I am. I don't care how many of them there are. They took one of ours, and I'm not stopping until I bring him home. Travis studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. All right, I'm with you. What's the plan? Jamal sat back, rubbing his temple as he thought. We approach quietly. Like before. Gather intel. Figure out where they're holding him. If we can, we go in without making a scene. But if it comes to a fight, he glanced at Travis. We end it. Travis smirked faintly. That's more like it. Jamal's expression didn't soften. This isn't just another mission, Travis. These people aren't going to stop unless we make them. Zane's capture might buy us time. They'll want to interrogate him, figure out what we know. That gives us a window, but it's not a big one. Then we use it, Travis said. Hit them hard, take what we need, and get out. Jamal nodded, his resolve firming. He folded the map and slipped it into his bag, then began checking his gear. Travis followed suit, his movements steady and methodical. After a moment, Jamal spoke again, his voice quieter. You ever wonder if it's worth it? Travis glanced at him, surprised by the question. What do you mean? All of it, Jamal said. The fights, the sacrifices, putting ourselves on the line over and over. Do you ever wonder if it makes a difference? Travis was silent for a moment, then shook his head. I don't wonder. I know it makes a difference. Maybe not to everyone. Maybe not in the big picture, but to the people we save, to the lives we change, it matters. Jamal looked at him, the weight of Travis's words sinking in. He nodded slowly. You're right. Travis smirked again, grabbing his rifle. I usually am. Jamal chuckled softly despite himself, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. Let's get to work. They stood, shouldering their gear. The night stretched out before them, quiet and uncertain, but Jamal's steps were steady as they moved toward the fight. The storage facility loomed in the darkness, its stark metal walls illuminated by the faint glow of floodlights mounted at the perimeter. The property was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, and Jamal counted at least 2 guards pacing along the entrance. Jamal and Travis crouched behind a cluster of bushes, their breaths shallow as they assessed the situation. Jamal adjusted his night vision goggles, the facility's layout becoming clearer in shades of green. 2 at the gate, Jamal whispered. Another on the roof with a rifle. Travis peered through his own goggles, scanning the area. They've upped their defenses. Must be expecting something. Good, Jamal said, his tone sharp. "The more they prepare for us, the more we know we're hitting the right place." Travis smirked faintly, but stayed focused. "What's the move?" Jamal studied the guards' patterns for a moment longer. "We take out the sentries first, then move toward the main building. Zane's likely inside. If they're holding him here, they'll want him somewhere secure but close enough to keep an eye on." Travis nodded, gripping his rifle tightly. "I'll take the roof. You handle the gate." Jamal gave a curt nod, and they split off, moving like shadows through the brush. Jamal crept closer to the fence, his steps silent as he approached the first guard. The man was pacing, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness in slow, deliberate arcs. Jamal waited until the guard turned away, then closed the distance in a few swift strides. His arm wrapped around the man's neck, cutting off his air as he dragged him into the shadows. The guard struggled for a moment before going limp, and Jamal lowered him gently to the ground. He signaled to Travis, who had already climbed silently onto the roof. A soft thud signaled the end of the rooftop sentry, and Jamal saw Travis give a quick thumbs up before disappearing over the edge. The second guard at the gate was facing away, unaware of the danger. Jamal crept up behind him, delivering a swift strike to the back of his head with the butt of his rifle. The man crumpled to the ground without a sound. "Gate's clear," Jamal whispered into his comm. "Roof's clear, too," Travis replied, moving to the entrance. Jamal moved quickly, disabling the padlock on the gate with a pair of bolt cutters from his pack. The chain fell away with a soft clink, and he pushed the gate open just enough for him and Travis to slip inside. The main building was a large metal structure with high windows and a single entrance guarded by another pair of sentries. Jamal and Travis positioned themselves near the side of the building, hidden in the shadows. "I'll draw them away," Jamal whispered. "You take them out." Travis nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. Jamal picked up a small rock and tossed it toward the opposite side of the building. The clatter of the rock hitting the metal wall drew the guards' attention instantly. "What was that?" one of them muttered, turning toward the sound. "Go check it out," the other said. As the first guard moved toward the noise, Travis struck, pulling him into the shadows and dispatching him quickly. Jamal moved in on the second guard, taking him down with a precise blow to the temple. With the entrance clear, the two Marines slipped inside. The interior of the building was dimly lit, rows of crates and barrels creating a maze-like layout. Voices echoed faintly from deeper within, guiding their steps. "This way," Jamal murmured, leading the way toward the sound. They reached a closed door near the back of the building. The voices were louder now, one of them unmistakably Zane's. "Go to hell," Zane growled, his voice defiant despite the strain in it. A deeper voice responded, calm and menacing. "You're only making this harder on yourself. Just tell us what you know." Jamal's jaw tightened, and he signaled to Travis. They positioned themselves on either side of the door. "Weapons ready." Jamal held up 3 fingers, counting down silently. 3, 2, 1. They burst into the room, weapons trained on the 2 men standing over Zane, who was tied to a chair, blood dripping from a cut on his cheek. The captors froze, their hands instinctively going up. "Step away from him," Jamal ordered, his voice cold and commanding. One of the men hesitated, his hand twitching toward his weapon. Jamal didn't wait. He fired a warning shot into the floor, the crack echoing in the small room. "I said, step away." The man backed off, his hands raised higher. Travis moved in quickly, cutting Zane loose while Jamal kept his weapon trained on the captors. "You all right?" Travis asked Zane, who nodded grimly, wincing as he stood. "Better now," Zane said, his voice hoarse but steady. Jamal's eyes flicked to the captors, his voice like steel. "Start talking! Who's pulling your strings?" The 2 captors stood frozen, their hands raised as Jamal's weapon remained trained on them. The tension in the room was thick, the faint hum of the facility's lights the only sound. "Talk," Jamal ordered, his voice low and commanding. "Who's funding you?" "What's the plan?" The wiry man with a sneer on his face scoffed, his expression defiant. "You're wasting your time. You don't have the reach to stop this." Jamal took a step forward, his voice cold. "I've stopped worse. Start talking, before this gets worse for you." The man's sneer faltered. "Fine. The money comes from out of state, businessmen, politicians, people who want to clean up towns like this. Jamal's jaw tightened. Names, locations. I don't know their names, the man stammered, but there's a meeting scheduled in 3 days. Big one. They're finalizing plans to expand. Where? Travis asked sharply, his voice cutting through the air. The man hesitated before glancing at his partner, who shifted nervously. Capitol Ridge, he muttered. There's a place there, a warehouse. They're meeting there to go over the next phase. And the weapons? Jamal pressed. The second man blurted out, Denver. There's a hub there where everything's moved before it comes here. Shut up, the wiry man snapped, glaring at him. Jamal's eyes narrowed. Good. Now, stay right where you are. Before he could say more, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from outside the room. Zane, leaning against the wall and catching his breath, stiffened. We've got company, he murmured. The door burst open, and several men stormed in, their voices sharp. Get them! Jamal and Travis moved quickly, flipping the table for cover. Stay down! Jamal barked to Zane, who ducked behind a stack of crates. Don't let them escape! One of the attackers shouted, their voices overlapping in the commotion. Jamal raised his voice, calm and authoritative. Stand down! We don't want to hurt anyone, but you're out of your depth here. The gang hesitated for a moment, their aggression faltering. You're cornered! Another voice called out. There's no way out. Jamal exchanged a glance with Travis, who gave a faint smirk. We'll see about that. Travis threw a flashbang into the hallway, the burst of light and sound halting the attackers in their tracks. Let's go! Jamal led the way, moving swiftly, but avoiding unnecessary violence. They disarmed one man who lunged at them, Jamal twisting his wrist to knock the weapon away and sending him stumbling back. Out of the way! Jamal ordered firmly, his tone brooking no argument. The attackers hesitated, their bravado faltering as Jamal and Travis advanced with calm precision. They used non-lethal techniques to subdue those who tried to block their path. An elbow here, a sweep of the leg there, but left most untouched, their focus on getting out. Zane followed close behind, his steps unsteady but determined. The exit's ahead, he called out. They moved as one, weaving through the facility until they reached the glass doors leading outside. The sound of reinforcements echoed behind them, but the team didn't stop, slipping into the open air and heading for the tree line. Once they reached the cover of the trees, Jamal signaled for them to pause. He turned to Zane, scanning him for injuries. You all right? Zane nodded, though his face was pale and his breaths were shallow. Yeah. Thanks for coming back. Always, Jamal said firmly. He turned to Travis, who was catching his breath. We've got the intel. Capitol Ridge, Denver. This operation is bigger than we thought. Travis gave a short nod, his expression grim. And now they know we're coming. We're not just dismantling a gang anymore. We're going after everyone behind this. Jamal's gaze hardened as he looked back toward the facility, the faint glow of its lights visible through the trees. Good, he said. Let them know. It won't stop us. Travis smirked faintly, his tone lightening just a bit. Let's make it count, then. Jamal nodded, already planning their next move. The fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. The safe house was small but secure, tucked away in a wooded area miles from the chaos they'd just escaped. Inside, the air was heavy with tension as Jamal spread the gathered intel across the table. Zane sat nearby, nursing his bruised ribs, while Travis leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his sharp eyes scanning the papers. This is it, Jamal began, his voice steady but resolute. Capitol Ridge, a warehouse on the outskirts. It's not just a meeting spot. It's the core of their operation. Their leaders, their logistics, their money. It all flows through this place. If we take it out, we dismantle everything. Zane leaned forward, wincing slightly but determined. And Scarface? He'll be there. This is too big for him to miss. He will, Jamal said, his jaw tightening. He's been the face of their terror in this town. And if we take him down, we send a message to everyone involved. But this isn't just about him. This is about cutting off their power at the source. Travis stepped closer to the table, his brow furrowing as he studied the layout. How do we make it stick? We can take out their operation, but if their leaders walk away, they'll just rebuild. Jamal's gaze hardened. That's why we're not just hitting them. We're collecting evidence. The intel we already have ties them to shipments, funds, and attacks. If we can grab more documents, identify their key players, and catch them in the act, we hand the authorities everything they need to lock them up for good. Zane frowned. What if the cops won't act? Lena said some of them are on the gang's payroll. We don't need all of them, Jamal replied. Just the right ones. I've got a contact, someone who owes me a favor. Federal level. If we can prove the connection to interstate funding and weapons trafficking, it'll be out of the local cops' hands. Travis nodded slowly. So, we're not just taking out their base. We're building a case, evidence, witnesses, the whole package. Exactly, Jamal said. The warehouse is their hub. If we hit it, we not only cut off their operation, but we expose everyone involved. Funders, leaders, even their supply lines. We cripple them from the top down. Zane glanced at the map again, his expression grim. But to do that, we need to get inside, grab what we need, and get out alive. Jamal nodded. That's the plan. We go in clean, quiet, and focused. Travis, you and Zane take the south entrance. It's less guarded, but it leads to their storage area. That's where they'll keep records, weapons, and anything else incriminating. Secure that first. It'll cut off their ability to fight back and give us the evidence we need. And you? Travis asked. I'll take the west side, Jamal said. It's the main access point. Most of their security will be focused there. I'll draw their attention and keep them occupied while you two secure the intel. Once you've got what we need, we regroup and take out their leaders. Travis exhaled sharply, his fingers drumming against the table. And Scarface. He's not just muscle. He's smart. If he sees things going south, he'll bolt. That's why we can't give him the chance, Jamal said, his tone cold. If Scarface shows up, we prioritize taking him down. He's the link to the local crew and their funders. If we take him alive, he'll lead us to everyone else. Zane gave a small nod, his jaw tight. We don't leave anyone standing. If even one of their leaders escapes, they'll rebuild. We're not just stopping a meeting, we're dismantling their entire network. Exactly, Jamal said, his gaze sweeping over his team. This is our chance to shut them down for good. If we hit them hard, gather the evidence, and hand it over to the right people, we'll take the fight out of their hands. No more terrorizing families. No more hiding behind corrupt cops. The room fell quiet as the weight of the mission settled over them. This isn't just about revenge, Jamal said, his voice low but firm. It's about justice. For every person they've hurt, every family they've driven out. This is for them. And we don't leave until the job's done. Travis straightened, his usual smirk replaced with a rare seriousness. Then let's make it count. We've come too far to let them slip away now. Jamal stepped back from the table, his expression hard. We move tomorrow night. Use the day to rest, gear up, and memorize the layout. When we go in, we're finishing this. Zane and Travis exchanged a brief glance, a silent agreement passing between them. Jamal stared at the map one last time. Scarface's name echoed in his mind, a symbol of everything the gang represented. They were going to take him down. They were going to take them all down. And there would be no coming back for this operation. The Capitol Ridge warehouse loomed in the distance, a hulking shadow against the starless night. Dim floodlights illuminated the perimeter, casting long beams over the chain-link fence. The occasional crunch of gravel and the murmur of voices hinted at guards patrolling the property. Jamal, Zane, and Travis crouched in the brush near the south side of the warehouse, their breaths steady as they scanned the area. Zane adjusted his drone, which hovered silently above the facility, feeding live footage to his tablet. 4 guards at the front gate, Zane whispered, his voice barely audible. 2 on the south side, and at least 3 on the roof. Main activity seems to be concentrated in the central office. Lights are on. Movement inside. Jamal nodded, his gaze fixed on the building. The office will have the intel we need. Logs, records, Maybe even communications with their backers. That's priority one. Travis leaned in, his voice low. What about Scarface? If he's here, he'll be in the middle of it all. You think he'll stay put if things heat up? He'll run, Jamal said, but not before we cut off his escape. We'll secure the exits after we take the office. Zane, you and Travis head for the storage area. Disable their comms and grab whatever evidence you can. I'll hit the west side and keep their attention on me. Zane frowned, adjusting his grip on his gear. That's a lot of heat for one man to take, Jamal. Jamal's expression didn't waver. I can handle it. Just make sure you get what we need. With a final nod, the team moved out, slipping through the shadows like ghosts. Jamal broke off toward the west side, his steps silent as he approached the fence. He cut through the chain link with practiced efficiency, pausing only to scan for movement. Ahead, a pair of guards stood near a loading dock, their voices carrying faintly in the cool night air. I don't get why we have to stay out here, one of them grumbled. Nothing ever happens. Orders are orders, the other replied with a shrug. Besides, with what's going on inside, you don't want to be caught slacking. Jamal moved closer, his footsteps muffled by the soft dirt. He waited until one of the guards turned away, then surged forward, grabbing the remaining guard in a swift, silent maneuver. The man slumped unconscious before he could make a sound. The second guard turned, his eyes widening as he opened his mouth to shout, but Jamal was faster. A single blow to the gut left him gasping for air, and Jamal lowered him gently to the ground. West side clear, Jamal murmured into his comm. Copy that. Zane's voice came back. We're moving toward the storage area now. Jamal slipped into the loading dock, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior. Rows of crates lined the walls, their labels hinting at the contents. Ammunition, rifles, and other supplies meant to fuel the gang's expansion. He made a mental note of the location, knowing it would be crucial evidence for the authorities. Meanwhile, Zane and Travis reached the storage area on the south side. Zane pulled out a compact device and began disabling the comms system, his fingers moving deftly over the controls. Comms are down, Zane whispered. They won't be calling for backup. Good, Travis said, opening one of the crates. Inside, he found stacks of documents, shipment logs, invoices, and maps marked with the gang's planned targets. This is what we need. As they worked, voices from the central office grew louder. Jamal crept closer, positioning himself outside a window. Inside, he spotted Scarface, his distinct scar catching the light as he gestured angrily at the others in the room. They're late, Scarface snapped, his voice sharp. We can't afford delays with the next phase. If this doesn't go off smoothly, we're done. Jamal's jaw tightened. He activated his comm. Scarface is here. He's in the office, running the show. Do we move on him now? Travis asked. Not yet, Jamal replied. Secure the intel first. I'll keep him busy. He waited for Zane and Travis to signal they'd finished before stepping into the open. Jamal made no attempt to hide as he entered the office, his weapon raised. The room froze as Scarface and the others turned to face him. Well, Scarface said, his tone mocking. Look who decided to crash the party. This ends here, Jamal said, his voice calm but firm. The operation, the terror. You're done. Scarface's smirk didn't falter. You think you can stop this? You're just one man. Jamal's gaze didn't waver. One man who's already taken down half your crew. And I'm not alone. Scarface's confidence flickered as Jamal's words sank in. Before anyone could react, Jamal fired a shot into the ceiling, the crack of the gun silencing the room. Hands where I can see them, he ordered, his voice like steel. The others hesitated, but Scarface's gaze hardened. You've got guts, Marine. I'll give you that. But you've just signed your death warrant. The air in the office was heavy with tension as Jamal's command echoed. Hands where I can see them. The men around Scarface froze, their eyes darting toward him for direction. Scarface's smirk widened, his posture loose but dangerous. You've got guts, Marine, Scarface said, his voice dripping with mockery. But guts only get you so far. Jamal's finger hovered over the trigger, his weapon steady. This is over. Step back and drop everything. Now! Scarface chuckled, his gaze flicking to one of his men. Show him why that's not happening. Before Jamal could react, one of the gang members lunged at him, swiping at the rifle and knocking it from his hands. It clattered to the floor, and Jamal twisted to avoid a follow-up strike, raising his arms to block a punch aimed at his face. The room exploded into chaos. Two more men charged at him, their movements clumsy but relentless. Jamal deflected one attack and countered with a sharp elbow to the ribs, sending the man stumbling back. But before he could follow through, another grabbed him from behind, locking him in a tight hold. Jamal struggled, his breath coming in short bursts as he tried to free himself. He slammed his head backward, the impact breaking the grip and forcing his attacker to stagger. "Not so tough now, are you?" Scarface taunted, leaning against the desk as his men circled Jamal. Jamal gritted his teeth, his muscles burning from the strain. He sidestepped a wild swing and retaliated with a quick punch to the side of the attacker's head. But the effort left him open. Another man struck him in the side, and he stumbled, barely catching himself. The blows kept coming, their numbers overwhelming him. For every man he put down, two more seemed to take his place. His vision blurred slightly, exhaustion creeping in as his body screamed for rest. Scarface's laughter cut through the chaos. "You really thought you could take all of us? You're outnumbered, Marine. Outmatched." Jamal clenched his fists, refusing to back down. He blocked another punch, countering with a quick jab, but his movements were slower now, each strike costing him more energy. One of the men landed a solid hit to Jamal's stomach, and he doubled over briefly, gasping for air. Before he could recover, another swung a crowbar, grazing his shoulder and forcing him to retreat toward the wall. Scarface stepped forward, his confidence growing as he saw Jamal falter. "This is where it ends, hero. Any last words?" Jamal's vision narrowed, his breaths labored. He refused to give Scarface the satisfaction of a reply. But just as the gang closed in, the door burst open. "Not so fast!" Zane's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Zane and Travis stormed in, their weapons raised. Zane's rifle swept the room, forcing the gang to hesitate, while Travis's voice cut through the tension. "Step away from him, or you'll regret it." Travis growled, his tone leaving no room for argument. Jamal looked up, relief flickering across his face as his team joined him. Zane moved to his side, helping him stand, while Travis positioned himself between Jamal and the gang. Scarface sneered, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "You brought backup. Cute, but it's still 3 against all of us." Jamal straightened, his breathing still heavy but his resolve unshaken. 3 is enough." Scarface's smirk faltered as the sound of more footsteps echoed in the hallway. Reinforcements were arriving, their shadows spilling into the room. Zane glanced toward the door, then back at Jamal. "This is about to get messy." Travis smirked, his weapon steady. "Let them come. We've been through worse." Jamal stepped forward, his voice calm but fierce. "You're not walking out of here, Scarface. Not this time." The gang hesitated, their confidence shaken by the sudden shift in numbers. Scarface snarled, his bravado slipping. "You're outnumbered. You can't take us all." Jamal exchanged a glance with Zane and Travis, their unspoken bond clear. Together they turned, standing back to back as more men poured into the room. The 3 of them formed a tight circle, their weapons raised and ready. "Last chance," Jamal said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Stand down, or we'll make you." Scarface glared at him, his fists clenching. "You don't scare me." Jamal's expression hardened. "Then you're about to learn why you should be." The room was silent for a heartbeat, tension crackling in the air. And then, the fight began again. The room erupted into chaos. Scarface barked orders, and the gang surged forward like a wave, their confidence bolstered by their sheer numbers. Jamal, Zane, and Travis stood their ground, back to back in a tight formation, their weapons raised. Jamal fired a warning shot into the ceiling. "Back off!" For a moment, the gang hesitated, their movements faltering. But then one of them lunged, swinging a bat toward Travis. The attack was fast, forcing Travis to sidestep, his weapon knocked from his hands as the bat made contact. "Travis!" Jamal called, turning to cover him. The distraction was costly. Another attacker charged at Jamal, slamming into him and sending his rifle skidding across the floor. Zane fired a few precise shots, keeping the gang at bay, but he was quickly overwhelmed as two men rushed him, knocking the rifle from his grip. Within seconds, all three Marines were disarmed, surrounded by the gang. Jamal's fists clenched as he scanned the room. The gang outnumbered them 10-1, their makeshift weapons ranging from bats to pipes. Scarface stood at the back, watching with a triumphant smirk. "Look at you now," Scarface sneered. "Big bad Marines, stripped of your toys." Jamal rolled his shoulders, his voice steady despite the odds. "Toys don't win fights. Skill does." With that, the first attacker lunged. Jamal met him head-on, sidestepping the swing of a pipe and delivering a powerful uppercut that sent the man sprawling. Beside him, Zane ducked under a bat and countered with a brutal elbow to the ribs, while Travis disarmed another attacker with a quick, precise kick. The fight was chaotic, a whirlwind of fists, feet, and improvised weapons. Jamal moved with calculated precision, his military training shining through. He grabbed a man by the arm, twisting it sharply to disarm him before delivering a devastating punch to the gut. "Keep moving!" Jamal shouted to his team, dodging another swing. Zane and Travis fell into a rhythm, their movements synchronized as they fought side by side. Zane caught an attacker's wrist mid-swing, holding him in place, while Travis delivered a punishing knee to the stomach. "Two more coming from the left," Zane called out, pivoting to block a kick. "Got it!" Travis replied, charging forward to intercept. Jamal blocked a punch aimed at his face, retaliating with a swift kick to his opponent's knee. He spun just in time to deflect another blow, his elbow slamming into the man's jaw. Despite their training, the gang's sheer numbers began to take a toll. Jamal felt the sting of a pipe grazing his shoulder, the impact numbing his arm. Zane stumbled briefly, a punch landing squarely on his ribs, but he recovered quickly, sweeping his attacker's legs out from under him. "Stay close!" Jamal barked, tightening their formation. The gang pressed harder, their desperation growing. One man grabbed Travis from behind, locking him in a chokehold. Jamal lunged forward, prying the man off and throwing him into another attacker. "Thanks," Travis muttered, his breathing heavy. "Don't mention it," Jamal said, his focus already shifting to the next threat. Scarface's voice cut through the chaos. "Don't let up! Take them down!" Jamal's eyes locked on Scarface, the gang leader's confidence still evident despite the fight turning against him. Jamal ducked under a swing, his fists connecting with another attacker's ribs before turning to Zane and Travis. "We finish this now," Jamal said, his voice low but commanding. Together, the three surged forward, their movements sharp and coordinated. Zane grabbed a chair, using it to block an incoming attack, while Travis used a discarded bat to disarm another thug. Jamal targeted the larger men, his strikes precise and punishing as he cleared a path toward Scarface. The remaining gang members faltered, their morale crumbling as they saw their comrades taken down one by one. "Hold your ground," Scarface shouted, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Jamal reached him first, his eyes blazing. Scarface swung a fist, but Jamal dodged easily, grabbing him by the collar and driving him into the wall. "This ends now," Jamal growled, his grip tightening. Scarface struggled, his confidence replaced with panic. "You don't understand. This is bigger than you." Jamal's expression didn't waver. Not anymore. With a final, powerful punch, Jamal sent Scarface crumpling to the floor. Around him, the last of the gang members were subdued, either unconscious or too injured to fight back. Zane and Travis stood beside him, their breathing heavy but triumphant. The room fell silent, the only sound the distant wail of approaching sirens. Jamal looked at his team, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "We did it," Zane smirked, rubbing his sore shoulder. "Not bad for being outnumbered." Travis chuckled. Yeah, but next time, let's not lose our weapons. Jamal allowed himself a small smile, then turned to Scarface, who groaned on the floor. It's over, Jamal said, his tone firm, and you're going to answer for everything you've done. The sirens grew louder, signaling the end of the gang's reign. The warehouse was eerily quiet now. The groans of defeated gang members, the only sounds cutting through the still air. Jamal, Zane, and Travis stood amidst the wreckage, their bodies battered